A civilian plane diverted to imprison a critic of the regime. A president who threatens to flood Europe with drugs and migrants. Just where is Alexander Lukashenko taking Belarus? Well, the exiled leader of the opposition says he's turning my country into the North Korea of Europe. Non-transparent, unpredictable, and dangerous. This is Roundtable. Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. So what good will new sanctions imposed by the European Union actually do? And how much support does Lukashenko still have from the Kremlin? Fighter jets were sent to intercept a Ryanair flight from Greece to Lithuania after an alleged bomb threat and escorted it to the Belarus capital, Minsk. Belarus was then accused of having hijacked the plane so that it could arrest an opposition activist, Roman Protasevich, and his partner, Sofia Sapega. Ryanair chief executive Michael O'Leary described the incident as a premeditated and unlawful hijacking and an illegal and reprehensible action. European Union and UK leaders have agreed sanctions against Belarus, including banning its airlines from using the bloc's airspace and airports.
This is an attack on freedom of expression, and this is an attack on European sovereignty. And this outrageous behavior needs a strong answer. Therefore, the European Council decided that there will be additional sanctions on individuals that are involved in the hijacking, but this time also on businesses and economic entities that are financing this regime.
President Lukashenko of Belarus has apparently now threatened to allow migrants and drugs into Western Europe if sanctions are imposed. 9 months after the protests against him began over allegations that he stole an election that kept him in power, Lukashenko is earning his reputation as Europe's last dictator. The opposition say the country is in danger of becoming Europe's North Korea. Are they right? Well, let us welcome to this edition of Roundtable out of Vilnius in Lithuania, Franak Viacorka, Senior Advisor to the exiled Belarusian opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. We say hello to Hanna Liubakova, journalist and fellow at the Atlantic Council, and we travel to Northern Ireland, to Belfast, where we see Alexander Titov, lecturer in modern European history at Queen's University, Belfast. We welcome you all back to Roundtable. Alex, I'm going to come to you first of all, since you are to some extent on the outside looking in. How has Lukashenko's position changed since the protests began?
It didn't go well for him as he expected. He started his campaign in trying to play, to some extent, an anti-Russian card, arresting one of the presidential candidates, which was head of the bank owned by Russia, Russian companies. He was arrested, several men on transit to Ukraine, which were Russian mercenaries. And then, in the end, the scale of protests against, obvious falsifications of the results were such extent that he had to drop all his kind of pre-election plans and run to Moscow as the only country which would still talk and support him. So it was a huge shock to him, biggest protests I think ever in Belarus since then. And for a while, for a few days, it looks like he might even fall. But I think since then he has consolidated his position by
so he's in a stronger
unprecedented
position.
amount of repression against the opposition. Yeah. But all that, which seemed to be going well, he again undermined by diverting that plane, Ryanair plane, which caused another level of uncertainty and questions over his leadership again. So, he's been undermined since then. But,
can I ask you whether you think he's actually in a stronger position now than he was when the protests were at their height, or whether you think he's now thrashing around? Because I know you other two believe that he's in a weaker position than he was 9-10 months ago. Is that a view you share, Alex?
I mean, when the protests were there, you have almost 700,000 people in the middle of Minsk, and there seems to be powerless to do anything about them. That was kind of his weakest point. Since then, there's no mass protests against the position. Yes, his credibility is severely undermined, both internationally and inside Belarus, but he has preserved his control of the key elements of his power, the security apparatus and the state apparatus. And he's also seemed to continuously have the support of Moscow. So with those three things, security, state apparatus, and Moscow support, he seems to be in a relatively secure position for now.
OK, so Franak, you first of all, and then we'll play in a clip from Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, the opposition leader you work for. But your thoughts on why, and I read this in your notes, why you think he's in a weaker position now when the protests on the streets have gone away and he's still there 9-10 months after it all began?
I think he's in a much weaker position than he was. He is losing the feeling of reality. And this diversion of airplane, this is actually the symptom of his absolutely separation from the reality on the ground. Lukashenko is losing loyalty among his own people, among businessmen, among nomenclatura officials who supported him.
I'm asking you to give me exact examples of why he's losing his power base.
Number of the factors from police. We can see 1 people a day joining by poll, which is based in Warsaw, the organization of the factor is bad word, of those who worked for the regime before elections in August. Also, we can see the number of support for changes. We see surveys on the ground made in Belarus, and we see more and more people who believe that there is a deep political crisis, and the only solution is free presidential elections.
OK, let's hear from Sviatlana Tikhanovskaya.
Now I call on the European Parliament to make sure that the reaction of the international community is not limited to the Ryanair flight incident. The response must address the situation in Belarus in its entirety, or we will all face such situations in the future, as Lukashenko is turning my country into a North Korea of Europe, non-transparent, unpredictable, and dangerous.
So, Hanna, isn't that in a sense hyperbole? There's no nuclear bomb in Belarus. Whatever the president does is unlikely to affect the rest of the world very much at all.
What Lukashenko is actually doing is affecting the rest of the world. He is basically now drawing a new aviation map of Europe because airlines had to ban their flights because the governments of the respective countries told them to do so. So flights are not kind of flying over Belarus, and Belarusian planes are prohibited from landing in European countries. So it's all going to bring some long-term effects, obviously, for Europe, for the world, for the West, and also for Belarus, and also financially.
But these are minor inconveniences, aren't they?
It depends what effects they're going to bring, because, if flights are being diverted, many flights are being diverted, this is going to affect the economy as well, both the Belarusian economy, but also the European one, right? So this is not only about 5 or 6 flights being just, changing routes. So, and people, again, reputationally, Lukashenko is becoming toxic, not only for Belarusians. He is becoming not only an internal Belarusian problem, because there were EU passengers on the plane. Lukashenko is now a problem for the EU, for the region, for the continent, and, let's see, if not for the world. And I think Russians also understand that clearly, that he is just too toxic for anyone.
Well, let me just throw this out there. It was only a few days ago that he had a meeting with Vladimir Putin in the resort town of Sochi. Putin said that all this fuss about the passenger jet was an outburst of emotion. The two guys seemed fairly close to one another still. What do you think Putin's position is? Hanna, I'll come to you on this one and then move to you, Alex, on it. What do you think Putin's position is with regard to Lukashenko?
he wants to maintain the status quo, right, when it comes to Belarus. He's not a big fan of Lukashenko, but he doesn't want him to leave because there is no alternative. So he would support him as long as it's needed, though it's not really clear for me for how long Putin is going to support Lukashenko, because this support is getting more and more expensive. And I don't mean literally, I mean reputationally as well, because, well, for the Russian people and for the Russian elites, this is also not very convenient.
But Russia's already under sanctions. There are those who suggest it goes to various countries, poisoning different people, that it's quite happy to interfere in elections. Its reputation couldn't get much lower, could it?
When it comes to, well, okay, so there is the West, right, that is going to, might increase pressure on Russia, on Russian oligarchs, on the Russian authorities. But there are also Russian people who might not support Putin's actions when he supports Lukashenko. So let's also take this into account. And let's take into account the Russian elites that might also raise questions about Putin supporting Lukashenko, who is just...
Okay, I get that, Okay, I'll ask you about that response, Alex, in just a moment. But your thoughts on the relationship between Putin and Lukashenko, first of all?
Lukashenko, pre-elections, gave a very long interview to Ukrainian journalist Golden. He talked in detail about his relationship with Putin. I think I agree there's not much kind of love lost between them. Lukashenko has been an extremely difficult partner for Putin for many years.
So why stand by him?
Well, because there's no one else to deal with. He's in control. Lukashenko is in control of Belarus because he controls the security apparatus, state apparatus. There's no stronger position to topple him. And in a sense, also, there's a great asset for Putin in Lukashenko, because as your piece implied, that he actually is so toxic that almost anybody else would be much more acceptable in the West. Therefore, Lukashenko in many ways has nowhere else to go.
Well, he looks so bad, he makes everybody else look good. Well, that's a rather strange way of looking at it if you happen to be the Kremlin. But Franak, seriously here, you work for the opposition leader. She is in exile. The chances of her being invited back, are extremely small. But the point that's been made on this programme and on others indeed is that if the Kremlin had somebody that it could trust to install instead of Lukashenko, it would do.
It's up to Belarus people, not Kremlin, to decide. It's up to Belarusian people to decide how long Lukashenko will stay in power, how elections will be held, who will participate there. I think we look too much at the Russian side, and the Western politicians are very often, they mix two problems of Russia and problem of Belarus. If we will be able to separate and look at the Belarus issue separately, the revolution in Belarus that as non-geopolitical, but revolution for free elections, for dignity, for human rights, it will be much easier to solve it. Of course, Russia is looking at Belarus events as the possible scenario for Russia. And of course, they don't want Lukashenko to be changed by other leader as the result of revolution. So they're preparing their own scenario, the scenario which look like more acceptable to them and which will not create the domino effect in Russia.
So they may want to install somebody that is more acceptable to them because they don't want to see the Belarusian people vote in somebody who you might support. So what hope does that give for Sviatlana, Tsikhanouskaya and others who might want to lead the opposition? Not much at all, I would suggest.
Our biggest hope is that everyone will be back home. All those in prisons, let's not forget that more than 2,000 people are in jail and 450 are political prisoners. And many, dozens of thousands are in exile. So we have to make sure all of them are back home, and many of them will be able to participate in new elections. Okay. And Russia can play constructive role here. We hope that the Biden-Putin summit will open some new ways, some new channels of communication, and Biden will explain Putin that this revolution is not about geopolitics, that even Tsikhanouskaya or any other leader who will come to power in Belarus, he will not turn Belarus anywhere. Belarusians are pretty comfortable in being in the center of Europe, in staying neutral, but the only thing they want, democracy and freedom.
Let's hear from the man we've been talking about, Alexander Lukashenko. And Hanna, then I'll come to you.
Как мы и прогнозировали, As we predicted, our ill wishers from outside the country and from inside the country changed their methods of attack on the state. They have crossed many red lines and have abandoned common sense and human morals. This is not information warfare anymore. This is a modern hybrid warfare. We must do everything to prevent it from becoming a real war.
Hanna, where do you think he feels under attack? Because clearly that's what he's suggesting here.
I totally agree that he feels backed in a corner and that he is actually weak. We might not see mass protests right now because people are scared, because the level of fear and oppression is just incredible. It's just even dangerous to come out to the streets, just to walk downtown, because, anybody can be detained, can be arrested, can be kidnapped. Nevertheless, people are still resilient, people haven't given up, and people are trying to express discontent in any way possible. I call it a cumulative effect, and that's very important because Lukashenko knows that this is not over. The revolution is not over, and people are still, against him. They still oppose him, right? And you can see many, many signs of this. People are trying to self-organize in any way possible. They have changed the format. They are now protesting in their local neighborhoods. They are holding red, white flags.
But Hanna, this is what you told me 3 months ago. That the protests had disappeared off the streets and gone underground, but people were still uncomfortable in little local neighbourhood groups. I'm going to come to you, Alex, if I may, and suggest that it's interesting to hear the hope that both Franak and Hanna have, but isn't it a little bit of a forlorn hope, perhaps similar to that of the Syrian opposition, who many, many years later, and clearly with a great deal more bloodshed than we've seen in Belarus, still have the same person in power because he's got the right friends?
Lukashenko is not somebody who lives by his own accord, and so he has to be forced from power. And at the moment, there doesn't seem to be any force able to do it, to force him out, since he literally suppressed all the protests. And even if he is unpopular, as we can see, and he was unpopular before the elections, I mean, you need some kind of mass mobilization. And it's just not happening at the moment. So you need some kind of another event to do it.
Pressure from outside and the EU sanctions. Well, they've surprised some people, didn't they, with the speed with which they came in. Do you think they and any other measures of cracking down on Lukashenko may have some bearing?
No, I don't think so. I mean, certainly the sanctions were much more swifter and more widespread, and I don't think we've seen the last week they're discussing about sanctions on various export sectors of Belarusian economy. But I mean, you have to understand that Lukashenko, he is a man all about power. He's not going to give up because there's some sanctions on flights or anything else. He'll stand to the last. And yes, there would be much more difficult. There will be a worse economy. He has to be more reliant on Russia. But ultimately, what he wants to be in prison himself or be in power in Minsk, even if it's Minsk, he's completely isolated except for Russia. Of course, he'll choose to stay
Franak,
in power.
I see you nodding. So my question going to be, I can ask you to sort of say what it is you agree with, but I also want to ask you, how do you go about, as an exiled opposition, in returning to the country and getting these elections that you so wish to see actually take place? But give us your first point.
The first will be about sanctions, that, of course, Lukashenko will not give up power voluntarily, but sectoral sanctions, which were never imposed by European Union, will force him to do this. If not him, people around him, because there are many, many groups that were using their proximity to Lukashenko to satisfy their own interest. And right now they're unhappy. If potash, oil, steel, and wood industries will be sanctioned, that will hit strong on people around Lukashenko. And on the second question, I think we will be back home already the end of this year. Situation is developing very quickly. The last week events, the statements of Borrell, statements of Biden about Belarus, shows that Belarus will be on the top of the agenda next weeks and next months. And I'm pretty confident that Belarus can be a success story for Europe and for democratic world.
So what do you see happening? What do you see happening to Lukashenko? Do you see an end like Ceausescu's end, dragged to a firing squad? Do you see him being offered a chance to leave the country, going somewhere else. If he does go, do you see those people around him who become dissatisfied with him being happy to invite somebody like Tsikhanouskaya back into the country? How do you see it unfolding? You in a minute, Hanna, but Franak?
It can be Ceausescu, it can be Yanukovych, but it's up to him to decide. If he wants to stay in history, the person who is killing and murdering his own people, it will be Ceausescu scenario. But he can run away as Yanukovych as well. Or he can go to the dialogue to make concessions, conduct free elections, and stay living in Belarus as the first president. So it's up to him, but we have to put pressure in order to make these changes happening as soon as possible.
My goodness, you think he could stay in power with the support of the Belarusian people if he makes changes?
I think this could be the solution.
Okay. Hanna, I saw you wanting to say something then, opening your mouth, and of course I had thrown that one at Franak, but sorry to Franak to cut you short, but please, Hanna, take up the story.
I would actually say that the reasons for discontent of the people is so kind of the list of reasons is so long, so it's not really easy to satisfy voters when they are so angry. And that was visible before the elections when I traveled across the country and I talked to them. And then there was this police violence, police brutality, and now the divisions in kind of between those people who want him to go and those people who want him to stay are so huge. This is about ethical values. This is not only about Lukashenko and taxes or income or salaries, whatever. This is kind of the full list of reasons, and he needs to people have given up on him already, right? And that's why he needs to be thinking about actually living his office.
But you believe, as Franak does, tell me if I'm right on this one, that it will be the lack of support from those closest to him that proves most telling in the end.
That's what I was trying to say. It doesn't matter whether this was the case 3 months ago or not, but when he lost popular support, it's really too expensive to maintain the status quo, too expensive to pay security forces who would repress citizens. Yes, his elites who see that there is no way back and people want change would also kind of at some point think that, well, the change is needed.
Alex, what do you think could be done on top of what we've already seen in terms of pressure from the outside to make him either decide to hold these elections, which Franak would like to see, or decide he's going to get on a plane, not have it diverted and go somewhere that he likes?
Well, if you want to kind of look at external pressure, obviously there are two sides. The Belarus is squeezed between Russia and the West. And the more pressure the West puts on it, the more support Russia will provide, diverting exports of potash or oil or whatever via Russian ports or going them to China and so forth. So yes, there will be costs and it will be costly, but for Russia it's a kind of geopolitical game. They don't want to have any unfriendly leader or remotely unfriendly leader, really who would, for example, would advocate neutrality and leaving the security pact which Belarus has with Russia now. So they lost to Ukraine. They don't want to lose Belarus, so they will stand to the end in that respect. In terms of Russia, well, it really is simple as if actual people on whom he relies for support,
security forces, business people, etc.
But they're not.
Okay. Franak, you said you hope that it might all change by the end of this year. You said that to me this time last year.
No. Last time I said that 2021 situation will change. Situation already has changed significantly. We have absolutely new quality of the society, but Lukashenko is still there. I think this is the matter of months, but it depends on Belarusian people right now, but also on the international community. The role of international community became much, much bigger than last year, last fall. Right now, it's up to Western societies, US, UK, European Union, to show Belarusians a positive alternative. Many Belarusians who are in underground right now, they want to see for what they are fighting for. They want to see the positive alternative. And this comprehensive plan presented by Brussels a few weeks ago, this is exactly what Belarusians want to see.
Franak, thank you very much indeed. Last word, Hanna, if I can, from you. Putin and Biden meeting very, very soon. Do you think that could prove to be pivotal?
It might be. It just depends obviously on them. I think Putin will kind of adopt his really old strategy of saying that it's up to Belarusians to decide on their future and on the political crisis in the country. But it's important that Biden acknowledges that, well, agreements between Lukashenko and Putin will not be recognized. They would be reconsidered. All kind of attempts of Russian oligarchs to buy Belarusian state-owned enterprises should be also, they might be either sanctioned, or these agreements would not be recognized. So it's really important to send such signals that it's just too expensive for Russia to support Lukashenko at the moment.
So it could well be that the rug is pulled very, very gently out from underneath him by Russia. I don't know whether we've actually addressed the question of whether this is Europe's North Korea, but we have looked at the future of Belarus, and I think the next few months, as you've all pointed out, could be pretty crucial indeed. Listen, thank you very, very much indeed, Franak, Hanna and Alex, and wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable, we of course thank you for tuning in. Do so next time if you can. But for now, from me, David Foster, and the team, we wish you farewell.